Welcome to this live event honoring Ida B. Wells. This is one in a series of 6 events hosted by the Center for the Study of the American South in collaboration with other campus units and community partners, including the Chapel Hill-Carrboro NAACP and the Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition.
The Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition is a collaboration of local organizations and individuals committed to disrupting structural racism through truth-telling and hard conversation to achieve community healing and justice for all.
No single person has contributed more to addressing the horror of racial terror lynching in this country than Ida B. Wells, emphasizing the importance of courageous journalism in moving us forward in our quest for a more equitable and just society.
We hope you enjoy this live event.
Welcome to the grand finale of the Light of Truth Symposia, the culmination of 6 events honoring the late and phenomenal Black woman, Ida B. Wells Barnett. I am Renee Price, co-chair of the Orange County Community Remembrance Coalition, and on behalf of all the sponsors, thank you for joining us this evening. Please note that this event is being recorded. This and previous events will be available online, so please check in the Q&A for the link. We opened our series with guest appearances by Nicole Hannah-Jones, Ron Nixon, and Topher Sanders, talking about Ida B. Wells and journalism yesterday and today. The second event discussed racial terror lynching, noting that Ms. Wells led a courageous campaign against lynching in her day. Then Catherine Hunter Williams and Rasul Jahan performed a dramatic reading on the life and love of Ms. Wells. We also had an educators workshop, especially for teachers wanting to teach hard history. Our penultimate event looked at the life and work of Lewis Austin of Durham, who bought and shaped the Carolina Times and made it into a vehicle of change for African Americans. And now I am pleased to present to you Black Out Loud, a collaborative of artists from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Our guests this evening are artists and producers, Divion Drew, Cortland Gilliam, and Jerry Wilson. Jerry Wilson is a scholar, activist, and educator committed to making learning environments productive and welcoming for all students. His work centers on Black teachers and representation, the politics of education, civic learning, and the educational experiences of marginalized students. Divion Drew is a second-year Robertson Scholar at UNC Chapel Hill and Duke University. Last semester, she was enrolled in Race and Memory at UNC as part of the Race and Reckoning Initiative. Divion wishes to highlight the true history of the university as someone who is physically affected by it. And we have Cortland Gilliam, a scholar, poet, educator, and budding visual storyteller. He is a doctoral candidate in education at UNC Chapel Hill. In his graduate research, Cortland studies the implications of school discipline and youth activism for greater conceptualizations of citizenship. In a moment, I will turn the program over to Black Out Loud, who will introduce their documentary, engage in a conversation about their work, and then respond to your questions and comments. If questions and comments come to mind as you are listening, please add them into the Q&A. And now, Black Out Loud.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Price, for that lovely introduction. Thank you everyone in the audience for being here with us today at this webinar from wherever you're at, whatever time zone you may be in. We certainly appreciate your presence. We feel your presence, even through the screens and through our current setup. I'm really grateful to be here today as the bookend of a really great series, this Ida B.Wells series, celebrating her legacy. And hopefully throughout the course of this presentation, you'll see how we, the producers of Black Out Loud, have come to see our project and this collaborative effort as part of that legacy and part of that tradition of truth-telling that Ida B.Wells is known for. So without further ado, kind of want to get into this presentation. And other things. I want to say thank you to all the collaborators who helped put on this event. Many thanks to the Center for the Study of the American South, as well as the Orange County Remembrance Coalition, and all the other folks behind the scenes who helped make this a possibility. So Black Out Loud. Can we go to the next slide? So just really quickly, we kind of want to tell you about how this project has evolved, but we're going to try to do it in reverse chronological order. Black Out Loud is a project that has kind of snowballed and become many different things. There's been many kind of offshoots and kind of different sub-projects and sub-collaborations. So we're going to try our best to kind of trace it backwards, starting with the event of Black Out Loud itself. And then we're going to, so after a brief overview of Black Out Loud and what that event was and what it looked like, we'll get into our short film. And then following there, we'll connect to the work of Black Out Loud to the legacy of Ida B.Wells. And then we'll have some time for conversation, questions and answers. So if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to share them using the Q&A feature. Slide. So introductions, I think Commissioner Price did a great job. But again, my name is Cortland Gilliam. I'm a fifth-year doctoral student in School of Education, also a poet in addition to being a scholar and researcher. And yeah, basically my work is really trying to center Black stories, Black histories, and trying to weave these different aspects of my identity together to kind of bring these different projects to life. But I don't know if the rest of the presenters want to say a little bit more about themselves. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cortland. My name is Diavion Drew. I use they, them pronouns. And I'm actually a third year now, going into this school year. And I just have so much gratitude to my co-creators that I work with on a daily basis. And I just wanted to say that as well. And I'm double majoring in BFA, studio art practice, as well as African diaspora studies, with the intention to, create sculptures, create paintings, create photographs that center legacy. And legacy is something that is so important to me and so important to a woman like Ida B.Wells, who created the path that I continue to trailblaze on, a path of truth-telling, a path of legacy and honoring, where we come from and why that's so important. And, being an undergrad or graduate student on a campus like this, why it is so important, yet and still we rise, we thrive, we exist, we have power, we are excellent. And so I just am so honored to be here with you all. And I'm really excited to continue this event.
And again, my name is Jerry Wilson. I'm a grad student in the School of Education. I think the introduction did a good job of capturing what I usually say about myself, but I will just add that, Black Out Loud has become my work in a sense, and it's been a long journey to try to figure out how this project that is artistic in nature connects to my scholarship. But that journey has ultimately helped me to understand that it's all related. And I hope by the end of the night, that'll be apparent. But thank you.
So what is Black Out Loud? Black Out Loud is, as I said, is many things. It can be an attitude, a practice, and presence through storytelling, self-expression, conversation, and activism. But generally when we refer to, Black Out Loud UNC, or you see the hashtag Black Out Loud UNC, we are talking about a collaborative art exhibition that explores representations of Blackness within the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill community. And so that's exploring representations of Blackness, not only on campus, but also with considerations of what does it mean to be Black? What does it feel to be Black within the larger Chapel Hill community? So including beyond the reaches of campus. And the intention behind this event and this project development was really to highlight and to celebrate the many different ways that Black folks exist within this historically white university town in the American South, right? We wanted to highlight the heterogeneity of Blackness. We wanted to celebrate the beauty of that heterogeneity, and really without trying to moralize different ways of being or different kind of performances of Blackness, we wanted to really just center the many different representations that people engage in, and to put that in the fore, and allow that to speak for itself and to represent resilience and the strength of the community, particularly as it exists in the midst of whiteness that is oftentimes suffocating and always silencing, or in an attempt at silencing our experiences. And so that's kind of how we arrive at the name Black Out Loud itself, right? It is the idea that being Black and that Blackness is in and of itself a form of resistance, that being unapologetically and publicly Black is a form of resistance. And so that kind of guided our thinking around this event. And so with that, the event itself was an art exhibition that took place on September 25th, 2019. Hard to believe that was a year ago. So much has happened since then. But the event was originally co-sponsored by Yet and Still, which is a collaborative partnership between Jerry Wilson, myself, and now Diavion Drew, who's part of the Yet and Still family, I think we can say, and the Center for the Study of the American South, who's been such a great champion of our work and of the stories that we're hoping to tell. So we can go to the next slide. So getting into the meat of it, right? So how the collaborative art exhibition came to be, we put out an open call to the university to as many different channels as we could, for students to submit art projects, multimedia art projects, multi-genre, projects that explored this theme of representations of Blackness specifically within the Chapel Hill context. And what we got back were, we got painting proposals, sculpture proposals, some sketch work. We got back short film proposals, a handful of poetry, and some mixed media pieces as well. And we ended up accepting what came up, which was 10 undergraduate submissions and 1 recent alum who responded to our call. And what we did then is we brought everyone in, because we wanted this to not be a project or a process that was driven by how Jerry and I, or Jerry Diavion and I, envisioned a Black event at UNC. We didn't want it to be driven by our own kind of interpretations and experiences, and we really wanted it to, again, highlight that heterogeneity. And in order for that to happen, we needed the perspectives and the thinking of the artists and their idea of their own expression to kind of come through. So we had a series of I guess collaborative workshops, you can call it, leading up to September 25th, which was the day of the event. And during these collaborative workshops, the artists essentially talked through their projects, the inspiration for their projects, the themes that they wanted to bring out through their work. And also we allowed them to kind of think through how they wanted to present and showcase their work, right? And so they were able to start making connections between each other's work, and to kind of subgroup their work in along different themes. And so that I guess the culminating aspect of that was the event itself, which was kind of a pop-up style event within the Center for the Study of the American South. And I guess the last piece to add there is, we really wanted this to be a kind of a democratic process. We did not want to evoke a particular idea of what counts as art, or we didn't want to subscribe to particular notions of quality or of rigor or prestigious art, of high art, whatever. And so in that spirit, a lot of the people who submitted projects, this was their first time exhibiting their work. Even some of the participants who would even consider themselves artists, a lot of them hadn't had a chance to showcase their work in front of an audience. So a lot of people were coming at the process from different angles, from people who just started making work, from people who were picking back up a particular artistic practice after years of not doing anything, and also more seasoned folks who were a little bit more used to exhibiting their work. And again, just getting back to this theme of the heterogeneity of our experiences and our forms of expression. Next slide. The other part of this event, this exhibition, included a short film project that you guys will see shortly, where we put a photo booth up in the pits, which is the social epicenter of campus, or one of, I don't want to say it's the social epicenter. There are plenty of different social hubs of campus, but it's one of the social hubs of campus, and it's a high traffic area. And basically outside of this photo booth, we had the sign that you see displayed there that says, "Being Black at Carolina feels like." And we had whoever wanted to come, or whoever was Black and wanted to come, sit and respond to that prompt. And from their responses, we kind of edited together this 11-minute film that we'll get into in a little bit. And it kind of, again, speaks at the many different ways that people occupy or carry their Blackness within the space. And the last thing I'll add about that for moving forward is we had the opportunity to screen our film a few different times last year. And so again, we're grateful for the opportunity to screen it for y'all today. And so the night, this is the big night, right? So September 25th was our night of exhibition. We had it structured so it was in part kind of a gallery walk, an open gallery walk where, the folks at the Center for the Study of the American South were, gracious enough to let us kind of take over their space and convert people's offices into kind of gallery rooms. So, we moved furniture around. We really got in there and kind of mapped over, essentially, we kind of mapped Blackness onto the space in a way. And so we had part of the night was a gallery walk, and then the second half of the night was a performance block where our poets and our performance artists were able to showcase their work. And the night was, I would say, by any stretch of our imagination, it was a huge success. Over the 2 hours that we had the engagement, over 100 people showed up. Hung around, they fellowshiped with one another. They talked about the art pieces. They had food from a locally sourced caterer, Black-owned catering company called Peary Durham, and really just celebrated the stories that were on display. And I'll pause there to see if any of my other co-producers would like to share anything about that night. Before we kind of move into some images from that event. All right, I guess we're good. Cool. So again, yeah, it was just a really awesome gathering, which you'll see here. So we have some images of the porch. So we had some art outside displayed, as well as art that was in the house. You can scroll to the next slide, Jared. Here, I want to talk about this. So one of the ways that we were trying to engage is, we didn't want this to be an event where people just came and, voyeuristically looked upon Blackness and then went about their day. And so we had a lot of different touch points of engagement, one of those being these different artist cards. On these artist cards, it had all of the participants' information, their names, where how to contact them via email, but it also had like their social media handles, so places where you can see some of their art, or at least engage with them as people, right? And as creatives, and get to see who they are as individuals. And we also included their Cash App and Venmo information. we believe in paying artists because art is work, it's labor. It is not easy to pull from your lived experiences or from your imagination and then make that into something where someone else can kind of enjoy more passively. And so we wanted to include that as well. And then the last thing I'll add about that is on the flip side of the cards, we had different kind of questions that, discussion prompts that people who were visiting the event could use to kind of strike up conversation with either the artists themselves or with other people who were in attendance. And it was just a really great way to kind of bring people into the process rather than having it be such a disconnected kind of experience with the art. And then the last thing that we had was comment cards. So all the attendees could fill out a comment card and direct it particularly towards an artist, right? If they had specific comments for the artist, people who were particularly moved by a piece or who had follow-up questions, or just wanted to celebrate a particular work of art, they were able to fill out these comment cards and drop them into the box that we had there. All right, so we have some more pictures of some of the art. I'll try to kind of do quick overviews because I definitely want to get to our film and not talk too much. So this is some art from one of our students, Carly Smith, who did a series of interviews with some of her friends, all Black women at UNC. And she took portraits of them, but then also you can kind of see along the perimeters of the portraits, she pulled quotes from those interviews that was talking about their experiences of imposter syndrome or being the only in a classroom or things of that nature. And each of the little canvases were colored with that artist, or excuse me, with that participant or that subject's favorite, color. Next slide. Here's a look inside of the house. You see portraits that are on display from artist Hannah Wanamagan. It's a photographer who does some very great work. And it's kind of like off in the background. The installation that you see most directly in front, or I guess the right panel, is a series called Brown Skin Girls. It's a series of portraits of Black women on campus. Go to the next slide. This is a sculpture from Aja, one of our participating artists. It's a double-sided kind of multimedia canvas and glass mirror piece. One side is kind of a more fragmented representation of Aja's perspective in viewing the world. The other side is kind of a more complete glass mirror where it was interactive, where the attendees can use a dry erase marker to write kind of how they view themselves in relation to how the world views them on the other side. And we also had some, it's kind of hard to see in this image, but we had some portraits on the wall, and also in this room was an audio tracking of some poetry from some of our poets that was related to this theme of the theme of this room, which was kind of like perception. Here we have our very own Diavion Drew explaining one of their pieces, and I'll let them jump in here and kind of talk about maybe what was going on in this conversation, because they really like they were getting into it and sharing some good stuff.
Well, thank you for that transition, Cortland. This is one of the pieces, actually my masterpiece for my course at Duke, drawing the second level, intermediate level. And really with this piece really honors and venerates the first 3 Black men that Carolina had. And so with these amazing men, Leroy Frazier, Ralph Frazier, and John Lewis Brandon as well, like these were phenomenal men. These men had the ability to, join a lawyer of a high caliber and try the university knowing that they had the caliber, the ability to succeed. And the truth be told, they excelled in every aspect of their tenure at Carolina as well, even on the swim team. And so, the piece is multi-layered in a variety of different ways. The reason why I have the Carolina blue on the left and then the colors of NCCU, the burgundy and the gray on the right, is because, unfortunately, because of everything that they endured with their with their task to integrate, they eventually transferred to Central to complete their studies, or went on to the Army as well. And so, even though they were not the first African Americans to finish a full 4-year tenure, they had to reckon with the truth that African American students have the capacity to succeed, no matter where they are. And I was just so passionate, and that's why I'm moving my hands just like how I was, because I really, as an undergraduate, have so much gratitude to these men. And again, legacy is so important, and I see myself and all of the Black undergraduates and graduates of Carolina as an extension of them, and as an extension of their heart and their belief that Black folks can really succeed. Yet and still we rise. Yet and still our essence is enough to succeed no matter where we are. And so I really wanted to honor them in this piece, and I could not thank the Center for the Study of the American South enough for investing in this collective and in this collaborative to really shine a light on this, because this is something like Ida B.Wells shining a light on topics that and injustices that are very necessary to reckon with, so that we can reconcile, and so we can get to a place to a place of peace and liberation and joy. And that's really important to get there. So yeah.
Thank you.
And this piece is one of the pieces that I completed in the high school. The name of this piece is Deny. I'm not entirely sure if we have like a full piece so that you can see the front, but essentially, just recounting on the night, this piece Deny, and then in the far left, the Mirror in Darkness sort of piece that I have there with charcoal. I really wanted to create a narrative and a conversation around, Black existence, Black power, Black, grief, right? And so I'm not sure if you're familiar with William Paul Thomas or any of their pieces, but Deny was actually an inspiration off of his piece that incorporated a blue tint to Black faces. He actually had a talk this week, and essentially that sort of blue asphyxiation or suffocation, and thinking about my comrades Cortland and Jerry with the Noose Project, something that we'll explore later on in this presentation, and about how suffocating it is to be, in a space like Carolina, historically white, historically male, historically, in support of white supremacist ideals and this construct of gatekeeping. Right. And so with that narrative, I really wanted to channel that into this piece, and into the charcoal piece that I did about the reflection and about the mirroring, and about, the necessary truth that we all have to reckon with the history of this country, and the indigenous folks and Black folks, and the ways that our essence is something to be honored, and something to be represented in full, and something to, truth be told, really deal with the resilience and the amazing diversity of, storytelling, with, the theatrics and the performances that we had on that porch, during the Black Out Loud performance, and dealing with, just the poetry and the photography and the mixed media, just the wide array of talents that everyday Carolina students have, that the university does not showcase and very rarely shines a light on that. And so we really wanted to embody the spirit of Ida B.Wells and shining a light on the things that matter. And so, yeah, I'll go ahead and defer the rest of my time to Cortland.
Thank you. That's a great segue into our short film, which, again, we're walking back in the process. So this happened maybe 2 or 3 weeks before our night of exhibition. That was Black Out Loud. And again, this happened in the pit. And so I think that's kind of context enough. And I'm excited for you guys to experience this project, which, I'll say is part of a larger film project that we were working on, but this is the piece that's focusing on undergraduate student experiences. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Paul to begin the short film, and I hope y'all enjoy.
And does Carolina feel like home to you?
Ooh. It's kind of.
Does Carolina feel like home to you?
I would say, Carolina. black.
Being black.
Being black.
Being black.
Being black.
Being black. Being black at Carolina.
Black at Carolina.
Black at Carolina.
Being black at Carolina feels like a performance. Microaggressions just about every day.
Conflicting at times.
It means celebrating who I am.
Feels like you have a stronger sense of community than a lot of other places.
Feels like not only the biggest blessing, but one of the biggest curses as well.
It feels stressful, immensely stressful.
I guess feels like being black anywhere else that black people aren't, the majority of people.
Feels like I'm in a place that I'm not supposed to be.
It's just the majority kind of, it's not that they don't make you feel welcome, it just makes you feel like you have to hide a part of your personality or part of who you are, just so that you don't offend them, even though they more than likely don't care about offending you. I'm in an organization, I'm not going to name what it is, but just the other day, one of the white members was like, jokingly, oh, I didn't know they let black people in this. And I know it was a joke, and I know this person didn't mean to offend me, but I mean, come on, like, there's still only a handful of black people in this program today. And for that person to say this, it was just like, I guess it didn't offend me at first, but then later walking away, I'm just like, wow. Being black at Carolina has definitely made me aware of my surroundings. I needed to get a police escort because I got sick. All of a sudden, the police officer, he was a white male in maybe his 30s, 40s, said, people down here are just so racist. Where I'm from, and he was from California, people just got over it. And that took me aback that someone in a position of power, especially a white male, had the audacity to say that people just got over racism. That it hurt my soul, it hurt my spirit. Just think about how many people actually think that and don't say it. And that's so scary to me that we live in a world today that people think that they just got over it. They wouldn't ask the Native Americans to just get over it. They wouldn't ask the Jews to just get over it. So why should we just get over it? So
I would just say that Carolina can be conflicting because it can be liberating for students of color, but it can also be somewhat confusing. I am a minority here, so when I walk around campus and when I'm in the classroom, I feel like I'm not always represented as well as I would like to be. I feel like the curriculum and a lot of classes are still centered around a white voice.
It feels like a place where I have to conform for the most part, not a place where I can truly be myself all the time. So I have to separate myself from the school as a whole or from the center, the main areas from the school, just to be able to be more comfortable as who I am as a black person at UNC.
It feels like there's a specific set of rules that you have to follow if you sort of want to be accepted amongst other black students. There's a sort of performative aspect when maybe me or someone I know is around other black people and how they act in that space versus a totally different kind of performance when you're in a space where there are not other black people around.
It means a lot of things. But most of all, I think it just means being myself.
Why can't I just be Jocelyn? Like, I'm proud of being black, but for it to just be something that so vividly sticks out in people's mind about me when I leave, like, oh, she was the black one. Like, no, I was the smart one, the funny one. I was just the one who was there. That's what Carolina means to me, unfortunately.
But there had to be some other way of existing. And for me, I think I've sort of found that other way, that third way. I'm just myself. I don't try to perform. I don't try to change for other people. And I can tell that some people are hesitant around me just being me, but that's okay.
I'm not given the privilege to come from a place of not knowing. I don't necessarily feel like a student. I feel like a subject under constant study all the time. I can't be a student vulnerable or wrong at any point. I must be strong at all times, and to show vulnerability at any point is to show weakness. And to be black and to be weak is the expectation, so in constantly breaking that expectation, you have to rise above.
I feel like I walk around campus and I'm not looked at as smart or as intelligent or as capable as my white counterparts, and it kind of puts a big chip on my shoulder to be better and to be 100% at all times, and not be able to show any vulnerabilities or show that I may be struggling or show that I may be needing more help than I project to my peers or project to my professors.
Why did you choose Carolina?
Carolina has always been my dream school. Like, first came out of the womb, I was dressed in Carolina blue. I had all the Tar Heel gear and stuff. My family is a Tar Heel family, Tar Heel born and bred.
UNC was generous enough to offer me some money to come here, and I felt like coming here after going to ACE and orientation made me feel like I belonged here, especially with the black community here was very welcoming.
I feel like I've been able to find a black community on campus, and they've been very helpful in making the transition a lot easier.
I came here for Project Uplift. I saw the black community there, and that was kind of what really sold me. I said, okay, this is a black community that feels like they look like they uplift each other. They look like they really care for each other. So I figured this is where I wanted to be. And I still don't regret that decision, but it's just a lot different than what I thought.
I chose Carolina because of my future goals, and also I did a program called Project Uplift Plus that really let me see just the diversity that we have here, and the people, the diversity of thought, the diversity of just being who you are. And I thought that was so important, but when I got here, I didn't see too much of that, and this is week 3 of being in classes, and I'm just unsure.
Yeah, it's just we make up a lot smaller percentage than what I'm used to coming from an almost all black high school where we are the majority, and we can just kind of, I don't want to say do whatever, but just act just outwardly black all the time and not feel uncomfortable or feel shamed for it. Whereas here, I feel like I have to tone that down dramatically, especially out in public, out on campus.
I wouldn't call it home, but I'm definitely very comfortable here. I know, what to expect from Carolina.
In a sense, yeah, I've definitely made my closest friends. I have people that I call my brothers, and a lot of my close friends I talk to every day, all the time. I check up on them, and I feel like it's home here because I just love it being around the people that I cherish.
Parts of Carolina feel like home.
But I know that there's a strong black community. I know there's strong communities within Carolina.
Once you find organizations that you like, or groups of people like your niche, for example, BSM, then you can feel more at home. You can find people that help you navigate throughout the university.
I want to allude to James Baldwin in this case of feeling like home, feeling at home or feeling in home, and feeling like that sort of child, like that black sheep child out of all of the children that are present in a house. While you were in a structure that presents itself as a house, you realize very quickly that this house is not a home in the way that it is a home for other people. And so the sense of home that you have is only created by the support groups and the black spaces that you create. And so Carolina is a house, but the home in that house is my people. The home in that house is the work that I do. The home in that house is the support groups and other people who are black at Carolina simultaneously experiencing the same experience.
Oh, appreciate it. Or do you have a preference? Thank you. Yeah, that is our film project. So yeah, it's every time I watch it, I have to take it, I have to sit with it for a second, just because all that the students cover. And so I hope that, ideas are percolating for you all, and that questions are starting to formulate. And so I really hope that you can participate in the Q&A, which we'll get to in not too long. But without further ado, I kind of want to transition over to the second half of the presentation, where we're going to walk back another step in this process to what led up to the film. And so Jerry will take it from here.
All right, thank you, Cortland. So in this section, I kind of just want to talk about how Black Out Loud connects to the legacy of Ida B.Wells. We know that Ida B.Wells worked to promote the notion that lynching of Black Americans was not just a criminal act, but it was also very much an economic and political act as well. Excuse me, these were very intentional in the selection of who was lynched at which time period in which places. And even though they were often explained away as reactions or retaliation for criminal actions on behalf of the accused, we know that those were often fictitious to hide the true motives of the people who carried out these lynchings. But the prevalence of lynching meant that the noose came to symbolize a threat, the threat of death. And it was a powerful symbol used for intimidation and reinforcing oppression. And it's important to note that the noose is not the only tool of intimidation and oppression. Many different objects can serve that same function. So Black Out Loud was an extension of a protest over the culture of white supremacy at UNC Chapel Hill. And it continues to operate in the spirit of that protest. And that protest really connects to the symbolism of the noose, which connects to the legacy of Ida B.Wells. And I'll say a little bit more on that now. You'll see over to the left of the screen is a copy of the pamphlet, The Red Record, which Wells published in 1895, documenting lynchings of Black people across the United States. So the protest that was the inspiration for Black Out Loud was based on the premise that the Confederate monument that stood on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill until 2018 was the equivalent of a noose. The Confederate statue on campus was the equivalent of a noose. What do I mean by that? So in 2018 and 2017, leading into 2018, there were a lot of student efforts to remove the Confederate monument from campus. There were sit-ins, there were campouts, there were rallies, there were informational events where people could come and get more information, there were teach-ins, there were all sorts of student efforts to educate people on the meaning of the Confederate statue and help them to understand why it was so dangerous and why it was so offensive to many people on campus and should have been removed by the university. So in April 2018, graduate student Maya Little contextualized the Confederate statue by pointing out the violence that the statue symbolized. Maya poured a combination of Black blood and red paint across the base of the statue and was arrested for that. And Maya was charged with damaging state property and also charged with violating the university's honor code. And I remember being infuriated by that when I read about it and heard about it. And part of what was so bewildering to me was wondering how the university could punish Maya Little for contextualizing this hate symbol on campus, while they were guilty of maintaining the hate symbol itself, right? Morally, it was just indefensible. And I started to think about what would happen if a student hung a noose on campus, right? As was the case at Duke University around that time. What would happen if a student hung a noose on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill? How could the university credibly punish that student while it was maintaining a noose in the form of the Confederate statue on campus? And I started thinking more about that, and eventually the idea came to me that, well, what if instead of hanging a noose, what if I were to wear a noose around my neck and keep it on while on campus to draw attention to the violent symbolism of the Confederate monument? And I was unaware at the time that Cortland and I launched the protest, I was unaware earlier in that summer of the historical precedent of Howard University students and faculty engaging in an anti-lynching protest in the 1930s. When I first had the idea of wearing the noose around campus to protest the culture of white supremacy, I talked it over with Cortland, and he was supportive, but we were both kind of like, oh man, that's intense, and what we were most afraid of was the symbolism being misinterpreted. We didn't want it to come off as offensive to our elders, folks who know better than we did about the violence that the noose symbolizes. But we did a little research and discovered this precedent and felt a little more steadfast in our decision to launch the protest. And much later, I learned about this protest from 2015, which was led by Black women outside of Saunders Hall. There have been student movement against the presence of the Confederate statue on campus for a long time. And it's unfortunate that current generations of students on campus are often unaware of these histories, and it's not accidental, it's intentional. So when I found out about this, I was heartened. I actually found out about this protest on the website uncofthepeople.com, which is a student's dissertation project, Charlotte Fryer's dissertation project, which tells a lot of the history of activism on campus around reclaiming the University of the People. So again, we see the symbolism of the noose representing death and the threat of death lodged at Black folks as a means of intimidation. So on August 20th, 2018, Cortland and I, we read statements at a rally in support of Maya Little, in which we committed to wearing nooses around our necks while on campus for as long as the Confederate statue stood. And it was a very hot day. You can see us there in the picture sweating, and I'm wiping sweat from my forehead on that hot day as we stood out there. And as fate would have it, just a few hours into the protest, the Confederate monument was toppled that evening on the night of August 20th. So initially, after the statue was toppled, Cortland and I decided to suspend the protest. We wanted to take time to regroup and figure out whether the statue would be gone for good, whether it would return, and what our next steps should be. But eventually we decided to relaunch the protest that December when the Board of Trustees proposed building a $5 million shrine to the Confederate statue. And we ended up wearing the nooses while on campus from December of 2018 until October of 2019. So I just want to talk briefly about some of the symbolism behind the noose protest. And most of this I've not really shared publicly. And it's also important to note that this meaning has evolved over time. How we originally thought about it and conceived of it was incomplete, right? And it grew in meaning and took on additional meaning as the protest went on. So I'll start at the bottom left. The noose came to represent a complaint. It was a rejection of the performance that Black students are expected to give on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill. On campus, we are often treated as guests, right? And under the dictum of Southern hospitality, guests are supposedly treated well, but they are also denied certain rights. And one of those rights is the right to complain. Under the decorum of Southern hospitality, guests should be grateful and thankful for whatever they get, lest they wear out their welcomes. So for us, the noose came to symbolize a rejection of that performance. It was us making complaint against the way that Black folks are treated on campus and the culture of white supremacy on campus. Secondly, the noose came to symbolize our effort to make burdens apparent. The psychological toll of learning and living in buildings named after white supremacists and having to walk past hate symbols on the way to class, it typically goes unnoticed by our peers and colleagues and faculty and administrators, but it is a great toll that if you don't carry it yourself, you are probably unaware of. And we thought that the noose would be one way of symbolizing that toll and sharing that burden in some sense, right? Because we thought that when others see the burden of this noose, the physical burden, that it might be dispersed, some of that burden, and others would begin to take on some of that weight. So thirdly, the noose symbolized a broadening of the focus. We felt that too much focus had been paid to the statue itself, the physical statue, and not enough paid to the culture of white supremacy on campus that maintained the statue for over a century. And we wanted to make sure that, you know, that symbolism of the statue and what it represents wasn't limited to McCorkle Place, but that it went everywhere on campus that we do it, so that students and others would be constantly reminded of, you know, that hate symbol and the burden, the baggage that we were burdened with. And the fourth thing that the statue or the noose came to represent was a contextualization. We were intentional about the color of the noose. It was white, but the tips were covered in Carolina blue tape. And if you didn't know the function of a noose, and you just saw us walking around wearing these Carolina blue and white nooses, you might think that they were decorative, right? You might think, oh, okay, that's supposed to be some sort of spirit item, right? But if you know the function of a noose, then you are rightfully disturbed by the imagery. And the same thing was true of the Confederate statue. If you didn't know that it was a Confederate statue and what the Confederacy represented and stood for, you might look at this old bronze and concrete statue and think, oh, that belongs here, right? It looks historical, it looks right? But when you understand the symbolism, you should be jarred by that imagery, that on the flagship campus of the state university system, there's a glaring hate symbol that should be jarring. So we wanted the imagery of the noose to take on that same meaning. So conceptually, when we're thinking about the noose protest, we were inspired by and continue to be inspired by the scholarship of Patricia Williams, who conceptualized this idea of spirit murder. And she defines it as disregard for others whose lives qualitatively depend on our regard. And she defined spirit murder as no less than the equivalent of body murder. And these next two quotes at the bottom really struck us as we were walking around campus during the noose protest, because we became hyper aware of the gazes of others, right? It was something that we had to contend with. I am an introverted person. I'm a shy person. I don't like to draw attention to myself, but I was conscious of the fact that walking around campus with a noose around my neck, people would be looking at me more so than they already did. You know, my first 3 years at Carolina, before we even launched the noose protest, I'd already had to contend with how to engage people's gazes. And a lot of times it was the lack thereof, right? A lot of times when I was walking across campus and looking to make eye contact with people, people would avert their gazes. You know, they wouldn't even look at me. And I struggle with the meaning and the cause of that, and I still do in some ways, but this concept of spirit murder and the reality that, you know, the gaze that people engage in, especially across race in passing, is powerful, and it has the potential to do damage, serious damage, right? Especially to those who are marginalized in that context. And that's part of what Williams gets at with this idea of spirit murder. And to make her definition of spirit murder a little clearer, she talks about, in this quote, a news story from her childhood where a white man acting out of racial motives killed a Black man who was working for some civil rights organization or cause. The man was stabbed 39 times, a number which prompted a radio commentator to observe that the point was not just murder, but something beyond. What indeed was the point, if not murder? I wondered what it was that would not die, which could not be killed by the 4th, 5th, or even the 10th knife blow. What sort of thing that would not die with the body, but lived on in the mind of the murderer? Perhaps, as psychologists have argued, what the murderer was trying to kill was a part of his own mind's image, a part of himself, and not a real other. After all, statistically and corporeally, Blacks as a group are poor, powerless, and a minority. It is in the minds of whites that Blacks become large, threatening, powerful, uncontrollable, ubiquitous, and supernatural. So, as Cortland and I continued the protest, one of the things that really stood out to us, I'll go back on, was the idea that the noose was a humanizing force. The idea that whereas before the noose protest, when we would walk around campus, people would actively avert their gazes so as to almost ignore our existence. In a strange, perverse way, the noose became a humanizing force in that it forced people to look at us, at least look at us, right? And not that they saw who we actually were, but they saw us, right? So that got us to thinking about how Black death, in a perverse way, is a humanizing force. Right? It is only in death that Black people are confirmed to be humans and not the monsters that we often are in the white imagination. So we see nowadays, very often recently, too often, when Black people are killed physically at the hands of police, and then killed again many, many more times, spiritually, repeatedly, assassinated in terms of their character, in terms of how they're presented in the media, and how they are presented in the court system. It is our loved ones who go about the work of humanizing us post-mortem, right? It's loved ones of the deceased who share graduation photos or who share stories of the deceased and their children, who go about this work of humanizing us post-mortem, right? So we were conscious of the fact that the noose, as a symbol of death, was perversely humanizing in that way. So just to connect this idea of spirit murder to Black Out Loud, I think it's worth noting that the university's decision to place a moratorium on name changes in 2015 was blatant disregard for Black people. Disregard where people's lives qualitatively depend on our regard, as Williams defines spirit murder. I think it's a reality that the flagship campus of our state university system attempting to erect a Confederate monument in 2018 and 2019 is blatant disregard for Black people. I think that the Board of Governors entering a secret deal to gift millions to a white supremacist organization is blatant disregard for Black people. And these actions amount to what I like to think of as spirit lynching. There's absolutely spirit lynching. So to swing back around to the legacy of Ida B. Wells and Zora Neale Hurston, this quote is often attributed to Hurston: "If you are silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it." So Black Out Loud, as a response to the spirit lynching, is a resurrection. It's an attempt to document Black joy, pain, and everything in between. It is a scream where a whisper is expected, a complaint from guests in the home constructed by their ancestors, literally in the Avian's case, a reminder of the oft-forgotten, one item from a long list of efforts by Black students at Carolina to make our pain audible and legible to those in power.
So this is in honor of Ida B. Wells and the truth-telling aspect, and also the way that the media and the systems of white supremacy continue to caricature Black lives, both in physical and in spirit. I made this piece to honor the names of the Black women that have been erased. And so for protests and progress, these words encase the names of about 33 to 35 Black women, Black cisgender women from the years of 1944 until 2020. And I wanted to combine the instances of interpersonal violence and also the instances of state violence through the police apparatus. And both of these are very important because they're both influenced underneath the umbrella of white supremacy and the image that is trying to be killed with the way that these women were brutally and just trying to move forward, but just the way that their lives were taken, the way that their blood was spilled on the ground unjustly, is something that I wanted to shine a light on and to tell the truth about how many Black women, you know, in the age of Megan Thee Stallion and in the age of you know, the numbers increasing post-coronavirus of domestic violence calls and of the sort, and about how Black women, you know, just as Malcolm X said, is the most disrespected person in America. And that's why what Ida B. Wells did is so phenomenal in that truth telling and in standing in that truth. And so for Protect and Promise, these two words have 3 names in each letter, each with Black trans women that were murdered over the past 2 years. 2020 to 2019. And this is very important because in this piece, I wanted to unify both Black cisgender women and Black transgender women as women, because far too often in the media, they are separated and caricatured in their own particular ways. And so I also wanted to highlight the intentional genocide that is going particularly against Black trans women, and this idea that, or the image that the white supremacy, as far as the state as police, as far as interpersonal violence, is trying to murder, is trying to kill, both spiritually and physically. And so I honor the names of these women, and I honor the names of them in the spirit of Ida B. Wells to tell the truth about them and their stories. So I'll defer the rest of the time to the presenters.
Thank you, Diavion. So this last slide, so we're getting to a Q&A because we're really excited to get to y'all's questions. This is just a slide showing some of the work that Jerry and I begun under the moniker Yet and Still, which is kind of a creative, collaborative partnership where we work to, you know, shed light on the experiences of Black students. And you know, under this moniker, we've done events like we had an education summit for Black educators in the Triangle area, including higher ed and also but principals, you know, admin, teachers, counselors. And so one of those we had at the School of Education. That's what's shown on the left. We also try to make intentional partnerships with Black-owned businesses in the Chapel Hill community. So that we can connect, you know, incoming classes of Black undergraduates to these established Black spaces. So we are really trying to kind of be liaisons between the wider Black community and Black students on campus, so that we can target those feelings of loneliness that students often feel when they arrive here. So that's just some images of that. But if you can go to the next slide, I think we can, you know, kind of transition to get into Q&A. I think the last thing I'll share with you is our website, which I'm sure, I think it might have been dropped in the chat, but BlackOutLoudUNC.org. If you want to visit that, you can see a little bit more about our original night of exhibition, as well as there's a recap trailer from that event, where you can kind of see, you know, a little bit of the spirit of what it felt like to be present on that night of September 25th, 2019. As well as you can see artist profiles and learn a little bit more about and hear from themselves, them describing what does it feel like to be Black in their own voice. There's an artist page, and you can kind of interact with some of the work in different ways, as well as see kind of our framing around the event that we kind of talked about tonight. So it's now in the chat, so you can visit that at your own leisure. But I'm excited to kind of transition into our Q&A. And with that, thank you for hanging with us through this time. And yeah, I'm excited to get into this discussion.
Oh, well, thank you all three of you, for a fantastic presentation. And we have a few questions for you. Now, some were submitted with the invitation, and then we have a few in the Q&A. So the first question we have is Black Out Loud UNC a relatively new concept within collegiate filmmaking? And I'll add on to that, what were the sources of inspiration for the student participants? And I'm not going to call on you. You can, whoever has the answer.
So I guess I'll share it, and then if anyone else wants to jump in, for sure. In the sense, I can't say it's 100% novel in the sense that it's never been done before. I won't go as far as saying that. I will say that, you know, I think, at least in my experience, I haven't seen a lot of media that's really digging into Black lived experiences within PWI universities. And I think I've seen some of that. There's some stuff on YouTube. There's some clips you can probably find. I think, and you see more of that, you know, 2015 onwards, a lot of that was fueled by the growth of the Black Lives Matter movement, or the movement for Black Lives, following the death of the murder of Michael Brown. And so you see a little bit more public, campus-wide conversations kind of bubbling up in that period around Blackness, but particularly, focusing on Black experiences at PWIs. That's one thing that we definitely wanted to highlight and bring out, in the sense that there's somewhat of a void there, although I can't speak for all of what's been done in that regard. And there was a second part of your question, if you don't mind repeating it.
What were the sources of inspiration for the student participants?
I can share a little bit about that. While I do agree with Cortland's submission about how this concept isn't novel, I do want to uplift the way that you all articulated this, and the way that you provided multiple opportunities for students to tell their stories. For one instance, y'all set up in the pit area, and there were outside tables, typically around Lenore, and I would say from the hours of about like 11:30 till about 1:30 p.m. This is the area where a lot of Black students congregate. This is our safe space within like this house that some folks may call home and some folks may not. And so trying to grapple with that as well. But home is really where we are. And so Cortland and Jerry posted up where we were. And so, you know, some folks are like, you know, what kind of tent is that? What's going on? And so, you know, I went over there. I was like, hey, y'all, if y'all have you know, a few minutes and y'all want to contribute, you know, feel free to jump in. And it was super casual, but it was also a very deep opportunity and experience for each of the students who participated, not just at the pit, but at every single showing of the movie. Students were able to go to the pop-up booth at the end of the event to contribute their stories so that the film can continue to grow over time. So it's really a timepiece, and that in itself is a novel concept. So yeah, props to the men and to the folks who submitted their stories.
Okay. And then I have a previously submitted question, which is similar to one that was in the Q&A. So I'll ask both of them. What advice do you have for the other folks at predominantly white institutions in the South working for equity, justice, and representation on their campuses? And the similar question is, I teach at a high school that is predominantly white and known for great academic success, similar to Carolina, and hope you can offer some wisdom to pass on to my Black students who struggle calling our school home. Was that too many questions?
No, it is very succinct. Just passing on some wisdom, and while, you know, I am an undergrad, I'm a junior. Some wisdom that I would say is just, you know, I would say find your tribe, find the folks who really make your experience great. And that can be Black folks, but that can also be Indigenous folks. That can also be Latinx folks. That can also be a variety of different ethnic makeups. And so, because, you know, I went to a private school for high school as well. I was one out of 2 Black girls in my entire grade. And so for me, my home was really with the history professors or the history teachers at that time. And you know, they had the ability to articulate the current state of the United States and the state of equality and social justice. And they kept me intrigued, and they kept my passion, and they kept, you know, all of the opportunities just to delve into history, to delve into my passions, to delve into what really makes my experience at a school like that, where it was so isolating, so vibrant, right? And so I would just suggest to folks, whether that be, you know, middle school, high school, undergrad, graduate, find your tribe, find the people who really make co-creating, you know, such an experience, such a fulfilling experience at that. So yeah, that would be my advice.
Any other comments from Jerry or Cortland?
Just to quickly tack on, it's just like an echoing of that, but I think a lot of, you know, even as a, you know, beyond just finding your tribe too, or I mean, included in that, but a lot of people make the idea of, you know, tackling some of these systems, right? And you know, with the question of how do we dismantle all this oppression, how do we dismantle institutional racism? These are big questions, right? But I think sometimes they can be overcomplicated by the sense of there has to be this, you know, grand, elaborate, you know, scheme and like, you know, campaign to meet some of these things, which all that is necessary. But to quote one of my favorite rappers right now, No Name, she just says, you know, link up with your homies and do dope shit. Like that's on its baseline. Find your friends and, you know, tackle, like as Dion said, tackle a project. You know, think of something small that you can do. Whether that's putting on an event where you're centering a particular voice or a particular narrative, or just, you know, hosting gatherings. They can be social gatherings. All of that's part of resistance and all that's part of the resilience as well. So just grab the people who are nearest to you and dearest to you and put forth some things into action that feel good to you, and then that'll draw in more community. So that's the one thing I'll say to whether you're students at a PWI or if you're at a high school. I would pass that word on to the students at a predominantly white high school. I went to predominantly white high schools. I wish I had this perspective when I was, you know, back during that time. I often felt isolated and whatnot. But I think, what can remedy that is just trying to create and trying to do that with people who you feel safe creating with.
Okay, and now we're going to go from students to faculty. How can Black faculty use our relative privilege, relative being in quotations, relative privilege, and platforms to make Black students feel more at home, safe, and able to be their full selves on predominantly white campuses, especially when we often struggle to do so ourselves?
I think that's a great question. One thing that comes to my mind, and I'm thinking of the people who modeled this for me. So the Black faculty who have who opened themselves up and their worlds up, right? To kind of invite us in and, just have very frank conversations, right? Sometimes, again, there's the challenge with like public facing, what can we do versus, in private spaces, what can we do? But for example, one of my faculty members in previous semesters, Dr. Meta Jones in the English department, had a potluck for her class. And again, it was open to the class. It wasn't exclusively for Black students. However, I think that kind of mode of engaging people is a way that can create some of those feelings, some of that affinity and some of those feelings of safety. And so I think Black faculty can be intentional about doing that with Black undergraduate or graduate students, just saying, let's have a meetup. It doesn't have to necessarily be people's homes because, everybody, whatever. But just kind of extending that a little bit and kind of pulling in, which again, I know takes effort and takes work, and that's hard to do on top of being a Black faculty member and just getting through in that respect. But that's one of the things I would say is kind of trying to plan spaces to gather with your Black students who are looking for that community.
I would also add the uniqueness of Black faculty and their syllabi. I took the Caribbean as the anti-colonial resistance. That was a course for undergrad, and that really expanded my mind. And so being able to feed into that intellectualism is also really key for Black students and feeling that sense of resonance as well.
I was going to add that I think that it's important to note that a lot of what Black faculty can do to make Black students feel more comfortable at home is work. It's additional labor that is most likely going to be uncompensated. And that's unfortunate because, if universities did a better job of making their campuses welcoming, then the burden wouldn't fall to Black faculty to the degree that it does. But I just would like to add that, these notions of decorum and professionalism at universities are rooted in white supremacy. And I think that in as much as Black faculty can be an example of how to challenge those notions and norms while still presenting a representation of Blackness, I would say that that's very helpful for students to see and understand. Also, I think another way that Black faculty can support Black students' development and making predominantly and historically white campuses more welcoming is modeling relationships with other Black folks within the space. Because I will say that on these white campuses, it's often hard for Black students to figure out how to relate to one another and where to meet one another, right? Because of how isolating the spaces are, right? It's hard to figure out how to even approach each other, right? Much less how to exist in relationality with one another within this white context. So in as much as Black faculty can model that with other Black faculty in front of Black students, I think that's a very powerful thing for Black students to see.
Well, let's expand that a little bit. We also have a question: how can university employees support student activism? So I guess this question is going a little bit beyond faculty to the other, whether they'd be administrators or even the housekeepers or whomever on campus. And along with that, we had a question this evening. Saying thank you to all of you for this presentation. How can we support all of your work financially and otherwise moving forward? So how can other people on campus support you and people that just want to support you in the community?
Yeah, I'll say quickly for the first one about staff. And I think, you know, the CBC, the Carolina Black Caucus, is a strong model of that here in Carolina. But one of the things that they've done is, you know, try to partner up with Black student leaders, you know, to collaboratively plan events, or even just to pop up and show up at, well, obviously you want to reach out to folks ahead of time, but show up at Black student events and see, like, you know, how can we support your cause, or what are you guys trying to work on? Is there anything we can do together? Is there anything I can do in my respective space to make some of your initiatives, you know, run more smoother? How can I be a champion for you? So I think just more getting in touch with whoever the leaders of particular orgs are, building relationships with those folks, and trying to plan engagements that bring, you know, Black students and, you know, these models of Black professionalism, you know, together to kind of have some exchange. The second question, support, how to support. One thing I'll say is the Black Out Loud site. I will say BlackOutLoudUNC.org. I don't know if if we've removed the donation link from there, but there used to be a donation link in order to kind of support future projects. And I will say up front, we pay our artists, so the support that we receive goes into, you know, getting space to hold events, but then paying artists who contribute to any project that we work on. And that'll also be the space to go to see what's coming down the line. So in terms of our next collaboration or whatever, I saw another question about that. We will be posting to that website about our future, you know, forthcoming collaborations. So I guess I think that's my answer for that.
Okay. And I think we had a question here. Yes, I would appreciate hearing your thoughts about the relationship between racial terror lynching and the noose and the deaths of Black men at the hands of the police. And that will be our final question.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question one more time?
Yes. I would appreciate hearing your thoughts about the relationship between racial terror lynching and the noose and the deaths of Black men at the hands of the police.
Yeah, I think that what I was saying earlier about the news perversely being a humanizing force for Black people, and that it is only in death that we are confirmed to be human and not the monsters that we often are in the white imagination. I think that that is absolutely true when it comes to police killing Black people and using as a defense that they feared for their safeties, or they feared for their lives, right? Because it is so easily accepted that Black people are dangerous, that Black people are threatening, that Black people could at any moment harm someone white or non-Black, because people buy that notion so easily. You know, every time that defense is used by a police officer who's just murdered a Black person or an Indigenous person or a Latinx person, the public doesn't question it, right? And in a lot of ways, there are a lot of people in this country who are relieved, right? Because it's so easily accepted that this person now deceased was a threat, or would have been a threat. That logic just flows so easily that people don't question. Too many people don't question it. And I think that police officer shootings of civilians also serve as a type of noose, right? Like these killings are also a threat of what might happen to you if you don't comply, right? Or whatever other justification is given in these circumstances by people observing from the outside and commenting online and speaking on news networks. I think the links are all too clear, but I'll let the other panelists answer.
Yeah, if anything, just briefly, I'll just share a quote from Frank Wilderson, who I was fortunate to be in conversation with earlier this week, author of Afro-Pessimism text that came out this year. He said in another interview, he said, if you drop a stone into the well of Black suffering, you will never hear the stone hit the water. And I've just been sitting with that and reflecting on it. And in relationship to the question, you know, one thing that the history of racial terror and current history of police violence makes clear to me is that there's a legacy of suffering that seems to prop up, you know what I mean, our society in particular ways for the reasons Jerry just kind of pointed out. Kind of this kind of dealing with this imaginary threat that people see manifested in Black bodies. And so I've just been really thinking about that quote, an endlessly deep pool of suffering. And that's not to say that's not the entirety of the experience, of course, but the suffering itself, there's a deep legacy there. And I think you see that in the work of Ida B.Wells. You see that in how she revealed racial terror by way of the news, but then a direct through line until today. The country has not moved away from that framework of suffering or that framework of violence. It's still very much part of how the country interacts with Black people.
And Diabian, do you have a last word on that?
I affirm everything that Cortland and Jerry have so wonderfully articulated. I'd actually like to touch on the commodification of Breonna Taylor as well, and how, you know, Breonna Taylor has whole documentaries, T-shirts on the cover of Vogue, you know, and this sort of sensationalism we see particularly with Black women and police campaigns as well. But also to this commodification effort, George Floyd also received the same treatment. And so on one hand, there's an erasure, and then on the other hand, there's like this overwhelming sort of, you know, sound around that. And in a way that sort of drowns it out, or drowns out the real purpose behind the organizing. So for me, like I said, I affirm everything that my co-creators have said so wonderfully, but Black women as well. One of the reasons why I made my piece is because they tend to be erased much more quickly, commodified much more quickly, and just treated very differently from our Black male peers in terms of the campaigns of police violence, interpersonal violence, any sort of violence that stems from white supremacy. And that's why I commend Ida B.Wells for the work that she has done and the legacy she has left for us to continue.
And I want to commend the three of you for a fantastic evening. Thank you so much. In closing, we want to thank everyone for engaging with us for this month-long recognition of Ida B.Wells Barnett. We took a look back of Black life in America, and now we are facing forward to the future with hope and inspiration from people like Cortland, Diabian, and Jerry. So thank you. You are our hope. Again, recordings of this and previous events are available online, so please look in the Q&A. I think you can go to south.unc.edu. And with that, good evening. And if you like, you can wait. We will follow with a listing of our collaborators. They will follow. So good night all, and keep forward with the struggle. And thank you, Ida B.Wells, for being such a beacon of light for all of us through all the years. Good night. The sponsors of this event series are Free Spirit Freedom and Mentor North Carolina, Chapel Hill Carborough branch of the NAACP, Orange County Human Relations Commission, Human Kindness Foundation. Coming to the table, Rogers Eubanks Neighborhood Association, United Church of Chapel Hill, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, Center for the Study of the American South, Sonia Haynes Stone Center at UNC Chapel Hill, Center for Civil Rights at the UNC Law School, Orange County Arts Commission, Marion Cheek Jackson Center, Chapel Hill Public Library, Carolina K-12 of Carolina Public Humanities, and members of the Orange County community.